141st anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg. So it is Saturday, July 3rd, 2004. At this time, 141 years ago, Pickett's charge was just about over, because remember, we use daylight savings time. So we're, what are we, an hour ahead or an hour behind? Okay, we're an hour ahead of them. We're going to walk today in the footsteps of men from the Green Mountain state of Vermont, the 13th Vermont Infantry. This is the only battle that they ever fought in. They found themselves in a pivotal moment of that battle, executing a pivotal, decisive maneuver in that battle. And you today are going to do the exact same thing that they did, with one big exception. You know what that is? Nobody's shooting at you. So hopefully it's going to be a pretty safe and interesting experience for all of you. As I mentioned to everybody just a couple of minutes ago, this is not a program where you stand there and listen to me for the whole thing. You're going to participate in this program. You're going to be a part of the whole movement. You're going to work with the Mifflin Guard, our living history group that is down at the Pennsylvania Monument, in this program. Now, for this program to go well and for you to get the most out of it, there's a couple of things you have to do. When we get down to the Vermont Monument, you have to start thinking like a soldier and not a civilian any longer, which means you have to subordinate yourself to the people who are telling you what to do. We're going to form you into infantry companies when we get down there. The standard company in the 13th Vermont was about 65 men. So we will form you, I don't know how many there are, but we're going to count off 65 people, and that'll be a company. And if we have 65 more, we'll form another company. We'll get as many companies as we can, because this 13th Vermont had about 650 men here at Gettysburg. They were one of the biggest Union infantry regiments in the battle. So it'll be important for you to subordinate yourself and listen to what the people tell you to do who are formed into companies, and then execute the movements in the way they tell you to execute them. Once we start into the real time on this program, the Mifflin Guard is going to be firing black powder. When they go to fire, they are going to step in front of your companies by about 10 paces. Do not run up next to them or they cannot fire. Stay where you are. Let them move forward. That's for safety purposes. They will fire. When they're done firing, they're going to fire several volleys. When they're done, they have to cap off their weapons to make sure there's no black powder residue in the tube. Let them do that. When they're done, they'll indicate for you to come up on line with them. Then we're going to execute the flanking maneuver that the 13th Vermont did. When we do that, the Mifflin Guard's going to fire again. Hopefully, if we don't have a bunch of people in our way, they'll fire again. When we do that, once again, you have to be about 10 steps behind them in your companies. So if we follow those simple basic rules, we'll be safe. It'll be a really, really neat experience for all of you. You'll be able to, if you've got your cameras, to take pictures in the ranks, but you're going to get the feeling of what it's like to be in the ranks of an infantry regiment. You're going to, instead of hearing me talk about what gunfire sounded like, you're going to hear it. Instead of imagining what it'd be like to see smoke, you're going to see it and you're going to smell it. So we're trying to touch all of the senses today in this program. So it should be a pretty exciting and interesting program for everyone. The way the program will work, just to run through it so we all understand what we're doing, I'm going to talk up here for a few minutes about what's happening on the third day, because we have all levels of knowledge and interest here. From the grizzled veteran who knows everything I'm saying and probably more, to the novice who's just got here and wants to find out what this is all about. So we're going to try and hit all of you here. Once we're done here, we're going to march down Cemetery Ridge to the Vermont State Monument. We will meet up with the Mifflin Guard there. Once we've met up with the Mifflin Guard, we'll form into our companies, and then we'll march our companies across the Hancock Avenue to the position that the 13th Vermont is going to occupy when the Confederate infantry attack. When we form our companies near the Vermont Monument, we're forming where the Vermonters were during the bombardment that preceded the attack. But we're going to move across the road. It's just going to be easier. Once we get over there, I'll do some interpretation about the 13th Vermont's experience in the battle. Once I've explained that, then we're going to do it. We're going to execute it, try to execute it as close as we can in real time. That's going to involve a big maneuver and a march all the way up almost to the clump of trees, because the 13th Vermont advanced on the Confederate flank almost that far. When we're finished at that part of the maneuver, I am going to head over to near the clump of trees, south of the clump of trees. Any of you who'd like to come over for a couple concluding remarks are welcome to do so. If you're just so worn out and exhausted you want to get the heck out of here, go ahead and take off at the end of the program there. So that's the way this program is going to be organized. We're going to end up just south of the clump of trees, but west of the Union position, the main Union position, because the 13th Vermont executed a flanking movement. All right, that's the logistics of what we're doing. Let's set the context for how the 13th Vermont fits into July the 3rd. July the 3rd, the third day of the Battle of Gettysburg. The Battle of Gettysburg remains undecided. The Confederates hammered the Union Army hard the day before, but were unable to break the Union Army's line. And during the night, both commanding generals, Meade for the Union Army, Lee for the Confederates, came to differing conclusions on what they were going to do the next day. Meade was going to hold a defensive position and hope that Lee would attack him. He expected, contrary to some things that some of the veterans even wrote, there's more evidence that Meade expected Lee was going to attack him on his flanks, not on the center, on July the 3rd. General Lee has come to a conclusion that he is going to attack on July the 3rd, and he's going to do what George Meade expected. He intends to attack the flanks of the Union Army. The Confederate Army Corps of General James Longstreet, the 1st Corps, is going to renew the attack against the Union left, reinforced by George Pickett's division, which has not been in the battle. And General Richard Ewell's 2nd Corps is going to attack Culp's Hill. And the Confederate cavalry under Jeb Stuart will ride east of town to threaten the communications of the Union Army. They're not attacking the rear of the Union Army. That's a myth. They're threatening the communications. That battle plan was not executed for several reasons. First, Union artillery bombarded the Confederates early in the morning on July 3rd on Culp's Hill, and the forces over there were such close proximity, they became embroiled in a heavy infantry battle at about 5 a.m. in the morning. About 5:30 in the morning, or 6, General Lee is going to ride from his headquarters near the Lutheran Seminary down Seminary Ridge to see how General Longstreet's preparations are going. He discovers that they're not going anywhere because General Longstreet has either misunderstood or misinterpreted his orders. We don't really know what happened here. He's drawn up a plan to march his whole Army Corps south and around Big and Little Round Top to attack the Union Army on its left end. This would extend the Confederate front from about 6 to 9 miles, and Lee does not want to attempt it. So he cancels that operation. He asks Longstreet if he's prepared to make the attack that Lee had ordered him to make, and Longstreet says no. He thinks that that's very ill-advised. The Yankees have been fortifying their position all night. To make a very long, complex story short, General Lee ultimately is going to accept Longstreet's argument, and he is not going to attack the Union left. But the battle on the Union right at Culp's Hill continues to rage through the morning. Instead, General Lee, Longstreet, and some other officers are going to study the Union position, and General Lee is going to conclude that if they're strong on the left and they're strong on the right, they've got to be vulnerable somewhere, and the center might be that point. So he pitches a new plan to General Longstreet. He says, now what we'll do, we'll organize an assault column built around Pickett's fresh division, and we'll assault the Union positions along Cemetery Ridge to the south of us here. We'll proceed the attack with a bombardment of nearly 150 cannon. To put this into our understanding, this would be the biggest artillery bombardment ever seen by an American soldier to that point in time. So if you're Lee, you're counting on this bombardment is going to smash them up really good in the center. Following that bombardment, about 13,000 infantry, 3 divisions, General Pickett, General Pettigrew, and half of General Trimble's, and part of General Richard Anderson's division will participate in this attack. If you're not familiar with the names of Pettigrew and Trimble, they were commanded by Heath and Pender, but both those officers are wounded. And General James Pettigrew and Isaac Trimble will take command in the absence of those other officers. This force will follow the bombardment after it's done its work. The purpose of the bombardment, demoralize the Union infantry and silence the Union artillery. Smash it up. Let that Confederate infantry get over that mile of open ground and close with the Union infantry defenders. Now, some people say that this attack was madness, but Lee has about 13,500 infantry committed to the attack. There's slightly less than 6,000 Union infantry defending Cemetery Ridge. So the Confederate infantry will have about a 2-to-1 manpower advantage. That's not optimum, but keep in mind the Confederates will have a manpower advantage in this attack. The key here is you've got to get your men over that open ground, the bombardment's got to silence the Union cannon, and you've got to demoralize the Union infantry. You've got to chop up units like the 13th Vermont. You've got to make those guys question whether they can stand against this infantry assault when it comes towards them. That's going to be the key here. So, through the rest of the morning, the Confederates are making their preparations. On the Union side of the field, the battle for Culp's Hill continued till 11 o'clock in the morning. And at that point, the Confederates concluded any more assaults there were an absolute waste of life. And they broke off the battle and withdrew. And the Union right was now secure. Let's wrap up what happened to the Confederate cavalry under Jeb Stuart. They do ride east of town. Their movement was detected. A Union cavalry division moves to meet them. And at 3 in the afternoon, the same time that this attack is going to take place, there's a large cavalry battle east of Gettysburg. We call it East Cavalry Field. It's an indecisive battle. Nobody really clearly is the winner. But Jeb Stuart is checked. He's not going to threaten the Union communications. So that aspect of the plan is neutralized. The attack on the Union right, that aspect of the plan is defeated. What we've come down to now, on the afternoon of July the 1st, is this big attack on the center of the Union line. This is a gamble. But as we all know, how many times did the Confederate Army invade Pennsylvania in the Civil War? Once. 4-year war. The whole Confederate Army only invaded Pennsylvania one time. They invaded Maryland twice. Actually 3 times. In Pennsylvania, only once. They sent a cavalry force up here in 1864. That doesn't count. I'm talking the whole army. What this means is, it's hard to get here. Once you get here, you may have to take some big risks. And Lee is gambling on the effectiveness of his artillery and the gallantry of his infantry to carry this position. But we're going to take a look at some farm boys and clerks and teachers and students and dry goods clerks and foresters and anything else you can think of from the Green Mountain state of Vermont. The 13th Vermont Infantry. These were 9-month volunteers. These men were destined to be discharged from the Army that summer of 1863. They have never been in a battle, and now they're positioned at the south end of Cemetery Ridge, and destiny and history are going to meet them at this moment because they're going to find themselves at a pivotal moment in this attack that we today call Pickett's Charge. And their story is the rest of our program. So what we'll do now is gather together, follow me, we're going to walk down this pathway. When we get down near the road, I need you to stay in a column and not spread out on Hancock Avenue. It's very busy down there. Stay off the road as best as you can, and we'll meet at the Vermont State Monument. That's the size of the 13th Vermont Company, 65, okay? You coming with us?
You bet.
You're number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34. All move down here. 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, 61, 2, 3, 4, 5. Are you with them?
No.
Okay. All right. That's one company right there. The Mifflin Guard will form you up. All right. Here we go. Now, this company, I want to move over here. Hold on. Let me start counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. Go ahead. 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 57, 58, 59, 60, 1, 2, 3, 4. I need one single. 64 is good enough. You got 64 in that company. Okay, 65. All right, everybody else, come over here. Come on over here.
We're the volunteers.
You're the next company.
We're the last call.
Okay, this is the third company of them, right here. So we got this group and this group. So we have three companies.
Put your rifle in the air. We're going to move down here. You are now second company. Go, give me 2, 9.
We got enough people for three companies.
I don't know if these guys want to participate.
You folks want to participate in the program, or are you just going to observe? You're just going to observe. Okay.
We'll participate.
Okay. Why don't you join that company right there?
Very important. Everything goes on one. If they fight, you get shot. Right there. Is the sergeant standing here? Yeah, they got it. How straight do you want this line, Captain?
We need a second sergeant.
And what we'll do is, let's take that company and put them on the other side of your color company.
So the color's about where you want, then we'll...
Yeah, that's good.
So we can,
Do you want to have, because we only have three companies of visitors,
all right, now
do you want two on the right of your colors or two on the left?
No, the color is supposed to be in the right half of the battalion, so there should be my guys, one company of your guys, then our colors, and then so the other two would go between the colors and the leftmost company.
Okay.
Right,
All
so
right.
take-
That company will go to the right of the colors.
Count 1. All right, ladies and gentlemen. I am what I was just going to do, sir. I am First Sergeant Wilson. This is Sergeant Parker. Sergeant Parker will be at this end of the line. The two of us will probably be yelling at you. Please do not take it personal. It is not because we do not like you, although we may not. That is not why we are yelling at you.
Okay, Scott. What we'll do is, once we get everybody up on the other side of the road, we'll advance into the field. At that point, I'll do a brief interpretation, like 15, 20 minutes, about what the 13th Vermont does during the battle. What we're doing right now is we're forming the visitors into company-size units. This is the size of a company in the 13th Vermont Infantry during the battle. They had about 65 men per company, which is bigger than a typical company in the Battle of Gettysburg. A typical Union infantry company was about 30 or 32 men. So this 13th Vermont, which was a much bigger regiment than a typical Union infantry regiment here. So we're going to get everybody formed up, and we're going to move them up onto the line that the 13th Vermont occupied during the battle.
Gargle, fall man. Company here. Right. Good volunteer. Well done. Always happens.
Brian Gasseri, this is Scott Hartwig.
In place. John Battalion. Shoulder.
Test.
The battalion will cross the fence and come 10 paces into the field and halt and reform their lines. Battalion, forward! 10 paces, march! Alright, now we gotta go back. You're an army! Look like an army! You fight like an army! You gotta march like an army! Alright, listen up, battalion! Battalion! Forward! Dress is right, immediately gets dressed. Dress and cover.
Look to your right. Find yourself the person on your right.
Colors. Colors. Right up the belt. Bring it up over there a little.
Got a bow in the range. Bring them up here.
Right out. We're company. Bring it up.
You left that fourth company in the stockade, Major.
Hey, how old are you?
You ready to fight, boys? Yeah! Kill! You ready to defend Pennsylvania? Yeah!
I want to be an airborne ranger.
Order!
The Vermont Brigade. Parade rest. Step back, keep one foot on the line. Your weapon is down. You look 15 feet ahead into the nothingness. Stand up.
Now is have all the visitors who are in the group give the Mifflin Guard a hand for the help in forming you into companies and making soldiers of you. Now, before we start into the program, I want to remind everyone the safety factor in this program. You have to listen. Remember, I told you at the beginning, you're soldiers now, you're not visitors here any longer. You need to listen to what your sergeants and your officers tell you to do. When the Mifflin Guard is firing, they will be in advance of you and you will be behind them. You do not come out in front of the group at all, under any circumstances. When we wheel, take it very slow and easy. I don't want any injuries. This field's really tall grass and it's very uneven ground out here. So we'll execute our flanking movement very carefully. Once we're finished with the flanking movement, the Mifflin Guard is going to fire again. Once again, the visitors will need to be behind the firing line. Do not move up until you're indicated to do so. We're talking today about the 13th Vermont Infantry. You're standing on the very ground these men were on this day 141 years ago. The only difference being we don't have the rest of the two armies here and nobody's trying to kill us. But we're on the exact same ground and we're seeing the terrain pretty much the way they saw it. If you were in the 13th Vermont Infantry, you might have come from Burlington, or Moortown, or East Montpelier, or Colchester, Morristown, Richmond, Bakersfield, Montpelier, Highgate, or Calais, all in the state of Vermont. You were raised in the summer of 1863. You completed your organization in October of 1862, and you did not fight in any battles until the Battle of Gettysburg. Your colonel is Francis Voltaire Randall. He had served with the 2nd Vermont Infantry at Bull Run and also on the Peninsula Campaign before coming back to take command of the 13th Vermont as their colonel. He's an experienced officer. Your brigade commander is George Stannard. Look behind you. There he is on top of the Vermont State Monument. He's missing an arm because he lost that in 1864. He had both of them here at Gettysburg. George Stannard was a 45-year-old man. He'd been the lieutenant colonel of the 2nd Vermont Infantry, fought with them at Bull Run and on the Peninsula Campaign, was the colonel of the 9th Vermont Infantry, which was surrendered at Harper's Ferry. But Stannard performed so well there, he was promoted to brigadier general, and ultimately will take command of what was known as the 2nd Vermont Brigade. They'll be positioned where we are on July the 3rd, the 13th, 14th, and 16th Vermont Infantry. Now, on the morning of July the 3rd, you were actually back where the Vermont Monument is. That's where our position was. We were lying down in that position there, supporting nearby artillery. We were under constant sharpshooter fire from Confederates out along the Emmitsburg Road, in trees, hiding in the tall grass, any cover that they could find. George Benedict, who was a staff officer to George Stannard, said that after a ball had passed through Stannard's coat and another cut a piece from the rim of his hat, he thought it was time to return these favors. And a dozen United States sharpshooters under a tall sergeant were sent down in front to deal with this problem. One of the men in the 13th Vermont said you could not walk upright without drawing a ball from a Confederate sharpshooter. So that was how you spent the morning. The other thing you spent was the day underneath the sun. The weather was extremely hot through the day, wrote General Stannard, and some men nearly fainted from the effects of the heat. I had to move some portions of my command to shelter them from the rays of the sun. Well, around mid-morning, July the 3rd, Lieutenant Albert Clark in the 13th perceived that a nearby rail fence, the fence actually ran east-west and it was behind us, that they could tear that rail fence down and come out where you are right now and pile the fence rails and build a low breastwork on the forward slope of this little knoll. We call this knoll Kadori Knoll, to your left. This was dangerous work because of the sharpshooters. And Lieutenant Clark suggested it to Colonel Randall, and Colonel Randall approved it. General Stannard approved it. And Lieutenant Albert Clark called for volunteers. To his credit, the first man to step forward was Sergeant George Scott. 20 to 30 more men joined Scott. They rushed the fence, and they proceeded to go back and forth until they had built a breastwork to cover the entire regimental front. But you're not going to occupy that breastwork yet. You're going to stay back, behind it, back near where the Vermont Monument is, and you'll use this breastwork if it becomes necessary, if the Confederates attack you. Now let's pause now on the eve of the great attack by the Confederates to find out who you are. Who are you, 13th Vermont? You are Albert Clark, Lieutenant, Company G, born in Grainville, Vermont, 1840. Had a twin brother. He'd studied law, was admitted to the bar, was working as a lawyer in Montpelier, enlisted August 25th, 1862, was elected sergeant, then to first sergeant, promoted to first lieutenant. He's going to be wounded in the ankle in this fight. He's going to survive the battle, and he's going to become a very successful man in the railroad business and newspaper business, and ultimately be elected to Congress from Massachusetts. You're Sergeant James B. Scully, born in 1842 from Burlington, Vermont, you were a clerk in a dry goods store. He was the most genial and affable of men. His friends were legion, and his word was as good as his bond. You're Elmis Stevens of Company B, 30 years old, from Warren, Vermont. During the battle, Stevens wore a rubber blanket across his shoulder. A Confederate shot him right in the chest, hit the rubber blanket, didn't penetrate his skin. He took the blanket off, and there were 19 bullet holes in the blanket. Stevens will survive the battle, and that'll be his souvenir from the battle. And Corporal Sereno Gould of Company C, 39 years old, he's your typical soldier. He volunteered August 29th, 1862, from Marshfield, Vermont. He was a robust, well-preserved man, just the kind for a military life in time of war. Evidently endowed with courage, health, endurance that made him an ideal person for soldier life. He was no brag, nor did he court danger or opportunity to demonstrate prowess on the battlefield. It was evident from his general appearance and careful speech he would not run at the sound of the first cannon or retreat until ordered. This is the 13th Vermont Infantry. At 1 p.m. on July the 3rd, the Confederate artillery bombardment opened. Lieutenant George Benedict described it. Shells whizzed and popped and fluttered on every side. Spherical case shot exploded overhead in rain showers of iron bullets. Solid shot tore the ground into furrows, and canister hurtled in an iron storm against the low breastwork of rails. Sergeant George Scott said all the hellish energy which modern ingenuity could invent was now engaged. Solid shot, grape, canister, spherical case, elongated shell, whirling, shrieking, moaning, booming, bursting over our heads. Our men lie low. They get behind trees, stone knolls, stone walls, breastworks, anything to give them a partial protection. To give you courage, George Stannard is going to be walking back and forth behind your line while you're lying down and during the bombardment, acting totally indifferent to this artillery fire. Ultimately, the bombardment ceases, and at about 3 p.m. in the afternoon, a stillness settles on the battlefield, but the smoke is still dense. It's drifting off the field. And Sergeant Scott recalled an officer riding down to the ranks of the 13th Vermont. And he said, "The rebels are forming for a charge. Prepare to meet them." Ralph Sturdivant, a private in the 13th, said, "We saw them as they reached the crest of Seminary Ridge." He's talking about the ridge right across from us, not Seminary Ridge, the one right next to the Emmitsburg Road. What he's seeing is Pickett's division coming at them. 5,500 men, and it looks like they're going to come straight at you and the 14th Vermont on your left. First, he could see a horse and a rider, then glistening bayonets, and then flags and banners waving and fluttering in the sultry air. Frank Haskell, farther up the ridge, said every eye could see his legions, an overwhelming, resistless tide of an ocean of armed men sweeping upon us. Now is the moment the 13th Vermont will crawl, slither, crouch, and run up to the breastwork. You see them coming straight towards you. The men directly towards you are Kemper's brigade of Pickett's division. As the Confederates come down across the field, they are going to stop their movement towards you and begin to swing to the north, presenting their flank to you. At this point, General Stannard will order the 14th Vermont to open fire. They will commence firing first, and very soon after that, you will commence firing. Now, we're not going to fire quite as much as they did. They fired 12 volleys into the Confederates. And the commands were, which we'll repeat today, make ready, take good aim, fire low, and then fire. Like an electric flash came down the line the order from Colonel Randall, quickly repeated by every officer in the line. Fire! Up rose the Green Mountain Boys as if by magic, taking deliberate aim, and with a simultaneous flash and roar, fired into the compact ranks. A long line of Confederate dead soon marked the line of their march across the front of the Vermont Brigade, wrote Lieutenant Benedict. Private Sturdivant said, at every volley the gray uniforms fall quick and fast. The front line hesitated, moved slowly, and melted away. General Stannard observes that the Confederate right flank is unsupported. And now he is going to order the 13th Vermont to change front forward on the 1st Company and move out into the field and outflank the Confederates. He's going to order the 16th Vermont in reserve to swing out and form on your left flank and outflank the Confederates as well. This is the great flanking movement. And the order that Colonel Randall will relay to you was change front forward on 1st Company. Captain Lonergan commanded Company A on the far right, and he used Sergeant James B. Scully, who we heard about earlier, as the pivot of this great movement on the battlefield of Gettysburg. George Stannard would write, "The heavens were completely filled with missiles of death of all kinds of descriptions that ever was invented to be projected from the cannon's mouth." As the Vermonters advanced northward, loading and firing and advancing against the Confederate flank, Lieutenant Benedict would say, for a few moments, the gray lines crowded together, falling meanwhile like wheat before the reaper, then breaking into a disorderly mob, they fled in all directions. Their dead and wounded and small arms by thousands strewed the ground over which they charged. In the aftermath of the great charge by the Vermont Brigade, 2 more Confederate brigades came over the ridge to your left and front on the south side of that rail fence. They were Pickett's supports. General Stannard orders the 16th Vermont to attack their flank, which he does successfully, and drives them both off the field. So these 2 Vermont regiments defeat 3 Confederate brigades on July the 3rd. Heady work for 9-month volunteers. But it came at great cost to all sides. If there was any spot on that great field of battle that approximated more nearly than any other the maelstrom of destruction, this was the place, wrote Ralph Sturtevant. They lay upon one another, clutched in death, side by side, the dead, dying, and horribly wounded. Some had on blue, but nearly all wore the gray. For on a few square rods, one could hardly step, so thickly lay the dead. 23 Vermonters would never go home. They would be killed or mortally wounded. 103 were wounded, and 10 were missing. 19% of the 13th Vermont would become casualties in this action. It's only right that a Vermonter should have the last word in my part of this presentation. One of the men who was here, years after the battle, he was here at the dedication of either the 13th Vermont Monument or the Vermont State Memorial. His name was Henry Clark. As he gazed at those 2 monuments and out upon this battlefield, he expressed some sentiments that some of us may feel. He said, "We look back upon our part, and it seems all a dream now, but vacant chairs and empty sleeves, and this monument remind us that it was no dream then." Ladies and gentlemen, with the assistance of the Mifflin Guard, we will now go through in real time what I just described in the last 20 minutes, what the 13th Vermont did here on July the 3rd. Once again, a reminder, safety is paramount. Obey your officers and your NCOs. All right, the first thing we all have to do, including the visitors, you have to lie down. The whole regiment was lying down. Everybody down. Look to your right and left. See how small a target you make now that you're lying on the ground. How this tall grass gives you some protection. That low rail barricade is going to stop a bullet. But Kemper's brigade is now moving across our front. I can see their flags out there, by the way. Kemper's brigade is coming down and moving across our front. And General Stannard has now come forward to Colonel Randall, here to my left, and has ordered Colonel Randall to engage the Confederates who are a couple hundred yards out in front of us, moving directly across our front. Imagine their flank is extending towards the Gadori farm. Their left flank and their right flank is extending towards us. Our duty is to deal destruction into their ranks. Go ahead, Scott.
Attention battalion! Rise up!
Just check yourself when you get out there. Make sure you got those little bloodsuckers on you. A little friendly.
Right. Shoulder! Hard! Mifflin guard only! 20 paces forward!
20 paces forward!
Fire!
Let you guys.
Mifflin guard, prime! Firing! 5 battalion! Ready! Aim! Fire! Whoa! That was a safety precaution. Our weapons clear. If there were really Confederates coming, we wouldn't have bothered.
Yeah, but they're friendly Confederates.
No such thing.
Firing! 5 battalion!
Firing by battalion!
Ready! Aim! Fire! Whoa!
I'm not sure. Load quickly, lads. Load quickly.
6 companies. Got 20 join in? What? 5 battalion!
Firing by battalion!
Ready? Aim! 2. Fire! Move!
Aim low, boys! Aim low!
Firing! 5 battalion!
Firing by battalion!
Ready! Aim! Fire! Whoa!
And you could reach it too. 350 yards. Pardon?
What's the effective range of the weapons?
These 350 yards. Because they're rifles, like a modern weapon of today. You're shooting 58 caliber slugs. About that big. So I'd actually seen call them mini balls, but they were
Firing by battalion!
like today's slugs. That's exactly what I was. Still using the same attack.
One more.
Shoot over their shoulder. The rear of the front rank is fire.
Firing! 5 battalion!
Firing by battalion!
Ready!
Aim low, boys!
Aim!
Come to the shoulder.
Fire! Prime!
The rear rank steps over to his foot, touching the other man's heel. Really clears both heads. His dip is at 13 inches. Keep this and this.
Yeah.
Firing! 5 battalion!
Firing by battalion!
Ready! Aim! Fire! Prime!
They're clearing. You notice when they go to fire, you see the rear rank
moves a little bit to the one side and you're stepping over so the clear heads. Some people you guys tap the guy in the front. And you turn around. But most of the time, all you see the guys in the middle. The old front guys are all fresh fish. If you're new, you're fresh fish.
Are you?
You learn everything.
Fire the third company.
Third company, prime! He said fire the third company.
It's authentic. It wasn't good in real life either.
Third company, firing by company. Ready! Aim! Fire! Prime!
Prime.
Third company, firing by company. Ready! Aim! Fire! Prime!
Don't believe it.
Tom's a suggestion. Come and do some firing with me.
This company don't do what they've done.
What are they doing wrong?
They're embarrassing us.
I might pass it on to Scott.
Firing by company. Third company. Ready! Aim! Fire! Go
All right, attention! Battalion! All right, our volunteers will now move forward and rejoin the battalion.
That's the company.
Forward, stand forward. The other companies, forward.
Forward! Come boys, stay together! Keep your rank!
Get up! Head
One
down.
ranks.
All right, Mifflin Guard already knows all this, but for the rest of you, as Scott already explained, of course, the Confederates are now drifting away from us, no doubt repelled by the ferocious fire we were presenting. They were advancing off towards the copse of trees there, opening their right flank to our attack. However, as they advance towards the trees, the angle becomes too extreme. We can't fire over that way effectively. We need to change the front of our battalion so we can fire in that direction. Now, there are two different ways of doing this. One is a wheel. That is, the entire regiment will swing like a big door. The hinge would be down at that end, and the rest of you would swing around. With a formation this size, that's a recipe for disaster, especially for 100-day men like we all are. Trying to do a wheel like that, the line would come apart. We'd be disordered. So the other way to do this is called a change of front. And we do it by company rather than by the entire battalion. I would give the command, battalion, change front forward on the first company. The first company will wheel around. Colonel David, just do it so you're at right angles to the road. Won't be a full 90 degrees. First company, right wheel. Now watch what they're doing.
That's what we have to do.
Got that?
It's like a door on a head.
Oh!
The sergeant is ahead.
All right, we're going to do that. They would have done it all at once. We're going to do this one company at a time to show you how it's done. Once the first company was in place, marking the new line of battle, the command would be by company, right half wheel, march. And each of the companies simultaneously would do a 45-degree wheel and then march out and do a turn up onto the line. We're going to use the second company here as an example. So second company, you're going to do a right wheel. You guys down at the right end, down here, you won't be moving very much at all. The rest of you will be moving at a normal pace. Try and keep your line fairly straight. We're going to swing out about a 45-degree angle. Second company, right wheel. All right, third company, you go ahead and do the same thing. Now change the company. Alert, off. Right half wheel, mark. Alert, mark. March out in a line on the next company. Fourth company. Half right wheel. Second sergeant, you've got to get in your post here.
Yeah, when they move out, sir.
Okay. March. Turn around. Guys in the center, you're moving about half step. Guys on the end. Out. Okay. Forward. March. Okay, they're in your hands. Drum music, Michael, please.
Hold up now, don't get ahead. Stay in a straight line. You got to maintain your company.
Michael's on video. Make the big deal.
I'll run the camera.
Line's breaking
all the other companies of the regiment would have done what you just did all at once, and so you would have been coming onto line one after the other very quickly. And in fact, the regulations, I honestly don't know how the 13th did it, but the regulations allow for the first of the companies to come online that they could open fire before the other companies were even online. They may have done it that way, I don't know. But now, you can see we've changed our direction 90 degrees. And as Pickett's men are moving across our front, we've got a perfect shot into their flank. Mifflin guard only. Shoulder. Fire. Mifflin guard 20 paces forward. March. Guys, post. Battalion, rammers and paper. Battalion, load. And paper. Ram the paper now. Ram the paper.
I would have done it. Yeah, company open fire right away.
You watch the men load. It's very interesting, all the steps they had to go through. They had to pull cartridge out, pair it with their teeth, dump the powder in, put the ball in, draw the rammer, turn it around, put the rammer in, turn it all the way down the
Five
street,
battalion!
down, put the rammer back in, bring it up, pull the hammer back, then around.
Fire!
Most guys can. Cold water.
You want to be an officer, huh, kid? You want to be an officer? Okay.
Firing by battalion!
Firing by battalion!
Ready!
Aim up your eye, that's it.
Fire! Prime!
The right wing is not quite.
Don't have a cap up, don't cap up. Shoulder arm. Shoulder arm.
By battalion!
Firing by battalion!
Ready!
Wait for the order.
Fire!
Wait.
Prime!
Down to here. Cap on your nipple right here. Okay, come to shoulder arm. Steady, officer. To the prime position. That's one. Good. Keep it up there. Back to the priming position.
The first company.
That's it. Now, on your shoulder.
Yeah, the residue of power from fire. Really, when
Those are ready. For the order. Ready? Aim. Get up there. Don't move it.
First company alone, please. Thank you.
Water, whiskey, tobacco.
It's a curse, Mary. It's a curse. Went over there and hit the double quick.
Battalion, forward!
Forward!
Guidelines out! Fire!
Come on, stick some cheers! Come on!
Come on, Colonel!
Split around that. Just split around it. Don't go through it.
A lot of their analogies are the same. You're dressing down and all that.
Is it really? Bless you, I would never do it.
Does yours feel good now?
They can't hear you, boys! Left wing! Get two! Watch the rocks in the stand! Watch the rocks over here!
You've advanced to the high water mark of the 13th Vermont on July the 3rd. It came up to this point. You can see how far we've moved, how far we drove the Confederates. You're only about 2/3 of the 13th Vermont. You had the 16th Vermont on your flank. Imagine how far out this line extended, how destructive this was to Pickett's right flank. This was one of the pivotal movements on the Gettysburg battlefield. Now, I want all the visitors to give 3 cheers for the Mifflin Guard. Hip hip! Hip hip! Hip hip! All right, everybody, 3 cheers for the 13th Vermont. Hip hip! Hip hip! Hip hip!
3 cheers for the guard! 3 cheers for the park ranger!
All right. Those visitors who would like to join me for a few concluding remarks I will go up south of the clump of trees. Those of you who are heading to a nice cold swimming pool or a cold one, I bid you good day. To the Mifflin Guard, I tip my hat and thank you very much again for your volunteer hours.
All right, the Mifflin Guard will advance by the right flank up onto the road at their earliest convenience.
How you doing? Good. Did you enjoy it? Was it fun? Good. All right. Every time I come out here on the field, particularly with big groups like this, I learn something myself, and I certainly learned something in this demonstration about the breadth of this attack by the Vermonters and how powerful it was and how far out it extended, even farther than I'd even imagined. And I'd always tried to imagine it in my mind, but today we were able to get an idea of what it really looked like and to be a part of it. That was pretty exciting. And I appreciate all of you coming along and also obeying the commands of the Mifflin Guard fellows who were helping you out. It really made a difference, helped make it safe, went fast, we had a good time. I want to wrap up with a few things. I had a couple of questions. One thing that I didn't cover in my little brief talk, because I wanted to keep it fast down there. We were out in the sun, it was hot, and you don't want to listen to me drone on forever anyway. But during the movement, Stannard, as far as we can determine, is the person who orders the flank attack. General Hancock had ridden down the ridge, saw the opportunity to hit the flank, and wanted to strike their flank, and when he gets down there, he finds that Stannard has already ordered the movement. He wasn't so sure of the safety of the movement that Stannard had ordered, but Stannard assured him that it would be okay. The reason I think Hancock was a little bit concerned is we don't know what the Confederates have behind that ridge. They may have more troops coming up who might hit the flank of a force that's outflanking Pickett, but Stannard assured him it was okay. Hancock allows the attack to go forward, and Hancock, instant after that, is hit and very badly wounded. General Stannard is also wounded during this movement, but he doesn't leave the field. He doesn't go and get medical attention for actually a couple of days, and then he was out of action for a little while. So Stannard's going to be wounded twice during the war. The second wound he gets is going to be a bad one, because that's when he's going to lose his arm. He's buried in Burlington, Vermont. If you go to Burlington, Vermont, on the shores of Lake Champlain, overlooking Lake Champlain, there's this large cemetery, and it contains George Stannard. It also contains Oliver Otis Howard, both from the Battle of Gettysburg. This movement by the Vermonters, plus the action of all the other Union regiments whom we passed coming up here in rushing against the Confederates who broke the Union line temporarily just to the north of us, had the effect of crushing the attack, defeating the attack, and driving the survivors back across the fields and capturing hundreds of men. The Vermonters in particular captured a very large number of men. The Confederates had over 1,000 men killed in this attack, a staggering figure in an hour-long attack. They had probably about 3,000 men wounded, and they had close to 2,000 men captured. In about an hour-long attack, the Confederate Army lost close to 6,000 men in this assault. I've always found it ironic that they labeled Grant the Butcher because of the Battle of Cold Harbor, when in an entire day, the Union Army lost about 7,000 men. In this one attack, the Confederate Army loses close to 6,000 men. Remember, it was this gamble. It was this gamble that Lee made. It didn't work. Green Mountain boys, the Bay State boys, fellows from Ireland, Philadelphia, New York, all across the North, checked the attack and drove it back. One of the keys to the attack's failure was these soldiers we talked about, whose footsteps we marched in. The other key to the failure was the failure of the Confederate artillery bombardment to do the damage that it needed to do to pave the way for the Confederate infantry. Because we know that those men in gray had every ounce of courage that these men over here had. And the men over here looked upon these men who attacked them with some awe, with the discipline and the courage that they carried into this assault. Ultimately, what did it all mean? It meant the end of the Battle of Gettysburg. The Confederate Army was spent. They'd committed every unit of the Army that they had to the battle. They had no fresh troops left. They did not have enough artillery ammunition left to continue an offensive battle. They had no other option really but retreat. But they were going to wait an entire day before they executed that retreat. They would remain on Seminary Ridge all day July the 4th. I don't think General Lee really knew the full extent of his casualties at this point. They are anywhere from 22 to 28,000. We don't really know the exact number. I tend to think the higher number is probably the more accurate one. That's almost a third of his army. The Army of the Potomac had lost 23,000 men in 3 days. The figures simply boggle the mind. A few years ago, I did some research into one Union infantry regiment here, the 69th Pennsylvania. They had 137 casualties. I was going to look up the pension records of every man who was a casualty in the 69th. I got through about 60 and was absolutely staggered by what just 60 casualties meant to the men, to their families, to the long-term repercussions. The idea of 51,000 at that point really awed me as to what had happened in this 3 days at Gettysburg. Well, the Confederate Army withdrew during the night of July the 4th. The Army of the Potomac began a pursuit on July the 5th and 6th. The Confederate Army reached the Potomac River first, dug in on the Potomac, which was flooded. They couldn't cross the river. The Army of the Potomac came up and set up positions around the Confederate position, and they prepared to attack the Confederates. But at the last moment, General Meade called off the attack because he was advised that the Confederate position was simply too strong to assault. And that night, the Confederate Army withdrew. By July the 14th, the Gettysburg campaign was over. The Confederate Army had lived to fight another day. The war was going to go on. So the Battle of Gettysburg had not been the turning point of the Civil War. It wasn't all downhill from this point. Some of the hardest fighting was yet to come in 1864. Abraham Lincoln would be so concerned that he would think he was going to lose the election of 1864 because of the way the war turned that year. So Gettysburg is not the end of it all. So why then is Gettysburg such this significant battle in the war? Well, we actually answered that question, part of it, early in the program. Did the Confederate Army ever invade Pennsylvania again? No. Did they ever retain the initiative to do that again? No. This was an opportunity that they never had presented to them again. The 28,000 men that Lee lost in this battle and campaign were veteran troops. It was very difficult to replace men like that. The men who would replace many of them were conscripts, draftees. They're not as good, they're not as committed as those men you lost here. The Army of the Potomac can replace their losses. That's the grim arithmetic of war. Lastly, the Army of the Potomac now knows that the Army of Northern Virginia is not invincible, that they can be defeated. The people of the North know that the Confederate Army is not invincible and can be defeated. Because not only did the Confederates suffer defeat July the 3rd at Gettysburg, July the 4th at Vicksburg, Mississippi, a Confederate Army surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant, and about a week later, a Confederate force at Port Hudson on the Mississippi surrenders. 3 defeats that shake the South to its boots. Doesn't defeat the South, but it's very demoralizing. And what it's going to do to the North is it's going to give strength to the Republicans and the war Democrats to pursue this war until the war is won. And that is what the real significance of Gettysburg is. That commitment that it gives to the people of the North, to the belief that this war could be won. I'd like to thank all of you for coming out today and remembering all these men who made such sacrifices. It's particularly poignant at this period in time in our own history where we've got people just like these men making sacrifices in another land for all of us. We can think about what these men went through, what those men are going through, and we can be thankful for what these men did on this very hallowed ground. Thank you very much, folks. Have a wonderful 4th of July.